So today we're going to start off with the roof of this building. And so we actually have two parts. We actually have this entry roof, and then we have the main roof here. So we're going to work on setting those both up separately. And so if we go here, we can start off with tracing this boundary. And so we'll find one corner, and we'll go out to the other corner here. And the next step would be, in my perspective, is making this into a group, so then that way we're organized. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off our second floor walls just so that we see that plane that we have there, and then I'm going to grab all this and make it into a group. Let's bring our walls back here, and just so we can see them. And let's offset, or let's actually get into our group first, and let's offset this roof out. And so why are we offsetting out? Well, we have a roof overhang, so pretty common, especially here in Canada, especially with snow, especially with rain. Roof overhangs help push the weather out like an umbrella would in a home or when you're walking outside. So that umbrella kind of pushes that water away from you. The roof overhang does the same thing. And so when we look back at our, not the slides, we want to go to our drawings. Typically, I will cross-reference this in a few locations. First we see on the elevations we have overhang of 12 inches. It says so 12-inch overhang. That's the OH. We can look in a few spots. We can look in our sections. We can look in our. I don't think you guys have sections, do you?
No, we don't.
No. Okay. Anyways, I have sections, so I'm going to look at my sections. You can't, but I can. I'm just kidding. We can also take a look at our floor plans. And so our floor plans may or may not denote that in a good way. So I'm on my second floor plan. You can see that we have an overhang here, but it actually doesn't really give any dimensions to it. So we'll rely on that information from the elevations, that 12-inch overhang. So let's go back to SketchUp here. We're going to offset this by our 12 inches. So we're going to go out, and we're going to type in 12 inches. And so that's our roof overhang there. The next thing we want to do is, I'm going to actually remove our interior, let's keep our interior line. Keep our interior line. Let's extrude this up, 6 inches. Nope, that didn't go up. 6 inches. And how far extrude up is somewhat of a stylistic thing. I don't know if the drawings actually specifically say how far or how big that overhang is. And again, I have sections, you don't, so I will ignore that. But our roof is, our top of plate is there. The one thing that you may actually see with a building like this is the roof might actually go down a little bit from that top of plate. I'm going to kind of ignore that just from simplicity's sake. I just want to make this a little bit simpler for you. Because I did a different version in the other class, which is probably more accurate to how this building is built, but it's maybe a little bit more complex. So you can watch those videos as well. So with our roof here, we're going to go up 6 inches. That's roughly our fascia board. So you can see that we have one on here. You can see that there's like eaves trough or something there, but we don't know. There's no dimension there. So we're gonna call it 6 inches. We're just gonna assume that that's the case. And then we want to start modeling our slope. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a cross here in the middle of our project. And we're going to model our slope in a few spots. So how tall is our roof? What is our roof slope? Well, in this case, it does give us a dimension, but I don't really want to rely on that dimension. I would rather rely on the physical slope. So it says here we have a 512 pitch. So we're going to use that. And so I'm going to start off on the one side here, and I think I did this in the other class I did a few months ago with the roof. Is instead of doing 12 inches long and 5 inches high, I'm going to do 12 feet long, 5 inches high, just so we get this further over. So let's type in 12 feet, and where is that number? It's right here, and let's go up 5 feet. And so this becomes our triangle here. So we're going to do this on all 4 sides, so 12 feet, and then we'll find here, and we'll go up 5 feet, and we'll go back. And so now that we have this, I'm going to actually connect these. And so if you click on that point and we find the pink line. The pink line is usually a continuation of the vertex. So we're just going to do that. And I'm going to model this roof a little bit differently than I did in my other class, so you can watch the other video to kind of see how I did it there. So let's go 12 feet, and we're going to go up to our, I think it's actually farther over, we'll go up our 5 feet, and bring that back. And once we find all these intersections, we're going to start kind of tracing it all in together. So let's go 12 feet here. Let's go up 5 feet. And we'll bring this down. And so now that we have this, you can see how, let me move this down. You can see how one peak is probably going to be lower than the other peak. And so let's connect this. And we could find that pink line, and I can just draw it through like this. And do the same on this side. We could also stop it at the intersection, so we know it kind of naturally intersects there. And so the way I did this in the other class probably is a little bit more logical from not understanding what's going on here. But and the reason why I say that is this part I have some inherent information I already know. Like I already know how this roof is going to look like, and I kind of already assume what's going to happen. And I'll tell you what I'm going to assume is you can see here that we have a flat spot. So we know one of the roofs doesn't go to a peak, right? And so when we look at this, we can kind of actually see that we need the shorter part to stop here because we can't have like a roof buried under a roof. It just doesn't work that way. So what I'm going to do, because I'm assuming that I know that there's that flat spot, is I'm just going to draw from the shorter peak over to the taller peak, this flat spot. And if you watch the other video, in the other video I just actually extrude these planes in different directions, and that's how I get this roof. But this method is also quite good because if you have a lot of complexity, a lot of angles, you can just draw all these triangles and figure out how that works. And maybe I'll redraw that in a second, and I'll show you how I created that other method. But now what we can do is we can start connecting all of these points. So we'll go from this point to this point, and this point down to this point. And once we have this, we can hide our lines here that we have in the middle, so our midpoint lines. And there we go. And so we have all of our midpoint lines hidden, and so now we have our hip roof there. So that looks quite nice, if I don't say so myself. So that's pretty simple, right? So as I mentioned, there's a different way to do it. I'm just going to close my group here. And so that's our roof. And maybe before we go too far, let's go to create a new tag. Let's call it roof. Let's call this roof on second floor. And let's apply our tag to this roof. Roof on, where's our roof? Roof second right there. And we can turn off this tag now. And so we have that. So let's just look at how to model this roof a little bit differently. That way it might make a lot of sense for some people, but not for others. So I'm going to do something similar here. And I'm going to skip the offset part because this is just on the ground. I don't need to do that. But we will still extrude this up. So let's extrude this up 6 inches. And then when it comes to the roof, if we do this a different way, same thing, finding the midpoints. We could draw that line all the way across, or we could just type in our 12 feet by 5 feet. And I mean, I could pick a different slope here as well, but I'm just going to use the same slope. And actually, what I maybe will do, let's pick a different slope going the other direction. That might be kind of fun. Bring that down. And so in this case, again, we can connect these points. So we can find our pink line, which is our continuation of our vertex. And that gets us our center point like that. And we can eliminate these pieces crossing if we want, or not, completely up to you. And so going in the other direction, let me pick the midpoint. We don't actually have to pick the midpoint, but we'll do that. So let's type in 12 feet here, and let's go up. Let's actually go up 4 feet instead of 5. So we'll actually have different roof slopes on different sides, which is not necessarily abnormal, but typically you like to keep them the same. And so when we looked at our other method I did in the other class, it's really this. So what I might do here before I go too far is, let's do that. So we have this kind of one plane going across here, and then here we want to extend this up so it meets our vertex, and then bring that down like so, and erase this. And so with these different planes of our roof, I mean, you can already see what's probably going to happen, but what we can do is we can extrude this all the way to this point, and we can extrude this to this point. The other thing that I also wanted to talk about, which we're going to probably use a few different times today, you can see here at the bottom, oh, I don't want to go away, you can see here at the bottom, it says Control to start creating new face. So if I hit Control, it allows us just to continue on that extrusion. And so we can do the same here. We can hit Control if we have to. We can bring this out. And I don't actually have to bring over the top triangle, but if you really want to see what the extrusion of all these different parts looks like, that's what it is. I'm just going to not extrude that part. And then on this side, we'll do the same thing. We can bring this over our 12 feet and up our 4 feet, I think is what I did. And we can extend this on our same vertex. I don't know why. Yeah, okay, let's just do that. Sometimes I like to not assume that it's going in the right direction, so that's why I'll just extend that vertex all the way through. And we can do the same thing here. We can extrude this. And, no, wrong direction. We'll extrude this one this way, extrude this one this way. And we don't necessarily need to extrude the other part the other direction because we already have an idea of where that ridge point would be. We could actually select both of these pieces here, and we can go under, I believe, tools, and we could find is this the tool? No. I feel like there is an intersect tool we used before. I don't remember where that is. Oh, there we go. Intersecting faces. Intersecting faces with selection, and it creates a line there. So we can find that line of where those two parts intersect. I mean, it's also not that complicated, so we theoretically could just draw a line from here to here, and that's our intersecting faces. And then we can just go through and we can actually delete a bunch of this extra stuff that we don't need. And then over here, we can just bring these other lines down. So in this example, we actually have two different slopes, which may or may not be useful to you. So up to you if that's something that you think you need or want, but you could theoretically have two different slopes on a roof, and then after you're done, you just remove all those unnecessary lines. And so here on the edges we have 512, and in the middle we have 412. And so that's how you can extrude those faces through to create a roof, or you can just draw those lines and find out where all those points intersect. So that's kind of two different ways to do it. And I will often use both methods, because if I find there's a roof that's really complex and I don't know how it intersects, I'll just extrude those faces through, and then I'll use that intersect tool to find where those common edges are. And if it's really confusing for you, what you could do is you could do the different planes as different groups, just so that you can extrude them through really nicely. And then you can ungroup them and then do the intersecting faces. So that could be another way of theoretically doing that. So I don't know if that makes any sense or not. But so another thing that's possible to do, and this is actually a really interesting example because in the last class I did it with the same slope. This class I'm going to do it with a different slope. So say we wanted to add a dormer here, and let's make it 4 feet in. And so our 4 feet mark is somewhere right here. And then let's make our dormer, let's make it 14 feet over. So not a nice number, not like our 12-foot number. And we want to create like a little bit of a peak here. We want to have some sort of dormer peak just to add a little bit of interest to this roof. Maybe you have it aligned with your entry door, so it kind of gives a little bit of an accent on the roof to tell people where to go, or maybe you just want to have a dormer. So lots of different methods and reasons for this. Let's go over 12 inches, and we're going to keep our same side slope. And so here's a kind of a technique that we'll sometimes do if we have different roof slopes. When you're visually looking at the building, our edge is 512, and so if we keep our dormer roof 512, no one's actually going to know that our bottom part is a different slope because you're just not going to be able to see that in this direction. And so I'm going to find my here. So we're going to go up 5 inches here, and we're going to go back to there, and we're going to go up our vertex like this. And let's find our piece over here. Let's go in 12 inches. And we'll go up our 5 inches here. And back down to our point. Find that intersection. So there's our dormer, so to speak. With this, again, we could extrude this, or we can just bring that line back. I think I'm going to extrude it just to make my life a little bit easier. And we can find those intersections, so we can extrude. And if it's doing something weird, again, you can use the control button to create a new face if it's not extruding the way you want it to. But now we have this peak, and if you look at this in the side view, you can see how the angle of the roofs line up on those two sides, so it looks cohesive even though it's a different slope than the main part. So that looks good. So what we can do here now is we can do our same thing we did before. We can click all these faces here, and we can go to Edit Intersecting Faces with Selection, and that gives us our edges of our roof there. And the next thing we want to do is we want to create a bit of an overhang or a profile. So like we don't want this just to be a flat face dormer. We want to like push in the actual wall a little bit. And so let's offset this our 6 inches. So 6 inches in. And then we're just going to extend these lines down, like here, and like here. And let's click this bottom line and remove that. And so now with this, let's extrude this in 1 foot. And so there we go, we've got a dormer. Another way to extrude this in a little bit differently, and I showed a bit of a different method in the other class of how to do this, but we can extrude this face in, and you can see how it's actually not letting me extrude. If we click the control button, it will allow us to extrude this in, and we can hit 6 inches. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this dormer fascia board back just a little bit from the edge of the roof, and it's just going to add a little bit of profile, a little bit of depth to this. And before I do that, we could also click these two faces here, and we could go to Intersect with Selection, and it gives us that crisp line there. And then now here, I'm just going to move this over this direction so I can erase these parts like that. And so now our fascia is set back ever so slightly from the edge. And we still have a bit of an overhang. We only have 6 inches. But we can again do the same thing here. We can do intersecting faces. Intersecting faces with selection, and it gives us the bottom edge of our thing. And we could actually do in here, we have these soffit conditions right here. So we can do the same thing with those intersecting faces with selection. So that's how to kind of do a dormer on top of an existing roof and make your roof a little bit more interesting. So the last part of this roof conversation is our ceiling. And so we're going to go in here and we're going to hide our main roof. And essentially what we're going to do is repeat part of this process. So let's go in and create a box. Let's extrude this up. And before we extrude it up, we want to know how far we're actually extruding this. So let's go back to our drawings here. And let's look at our second floor plan. On our second floor plan, we actually have two elements denoted here. We have our 2x6 ceiling joists, and then we also have our 2x6 roof rafters. So our ceiling joists are flat, our roof rafters are sloped. And so that's what both those elements mean. So let's model our ceiling joists here. And so we're just going to extrude this up 6 inches, but instead of 6 inches, because it's a 2x6, we're going to extrude it up 5.5 inches. And that's going to give us our thickness of our ceiling joists in our project here. Last portion is let's just hide our second floor walls. Let's grab this ceiling profile and let's make this a group. And then let's make this group have its own tag. So we'll call this ceiling second. And now we kind of have control over our ceiling layer separately. One of the things you could also do with this, you could add 1/2 inch drywall as a ceiling on your lower level. So you can physically model that ceiling layer. And what that does is you could model your joists, or you could leave your joist cavity open. And so the ceiling, you could have that drywall layer that allows you to model this accurately. And then also when you cut it through section, you can kind of see that ceiling layer. But then you could actually leave your joist cavity open and model all your individual joists in there as well if you wanted to kind of go to that level of complexity. So the ceiling is kind of a nice thing to do. The other thing about doing the ceiling is you're applying a material to the ceiling, not to like the whole joist layer or something else. So it's giving you kind of a layer of protection as you model, because you're only applying it to part of that model, not the whole model. So that's our ceiling there. So that's ultimately what we want to talk about for roofs here. And I guess, sorry, we do have one more part, which is our entry roof. And so this entry roof, I did a little bit of guessing when it came to this roof. And so when we look at our, sorry, not our slides, when we look at our area here, we have a line of shed roof below. Let's go over here. It looks like we have 2x4 ceiling joists and 2x4 roof rafters, which basically when I see that, it means we have a flat ceiling in that area. You could just have roof rafters only, and you could have a cathedral ceiling in there, but this is specified ceiling joist, so my assumption is that. The other thing I see here is we have a 2x8 beam. So that's the beam that kind of runs around, holding the ceiling and then holding the edge of that roof between the columns. And so those are a couple things I see with this. The next thing I want to see and understand a little bit is where this roof is. So when you look at this drawing, we have 36x84 window and door, and then our windows are at 7 feet from subfloor. And I don't really have any dimensions to where this roof actually is. And so I'm going to assume, just because I don't have any information, there's roughly 1 foot between the top of the door and this beam. So I don't have a dimension for that. I'm just going to assume that. And then the other thing we have here is our 6x12. So let's start off by modeling our beam. And so let's go back to SketchUp. And with this, we're going to go from our subfloor. Our subfloor is this top line here. We're going to go up 7 feet. And we have a line here. And I'm just going to draw this line across like this. And I don't need to necessarily go to the top line. I'm just going to model that line up like that. And so that's kind of the bottom of our beams. And actually, that's the top of our door, not the bottom of our beam. So that's our 7 feet. And so realistically, let's kind of mock up the rest of this area here. And again, I'll just model stuff past in order to get a rough understanding of where that element is. And we can eliminate some of these lines. And so let's move this up 1 foot. And with our beams, as I mentioned when we were looking at the drawings, we had two 2x8s, and so we're going to go up 7¼ inches. The reality is, you're probably going to end up putting some decorative element around that as well. But I'm just going to model those beams only for now. And so let's before we do that, let's actually offset this in. So we're going to offset this in by 3 inches. Again, the reason why we're doing 3 inches is we have two 2x8s. So 1.5 inches times 2, we got 3 inches. So let's bring this in 3 inches. So our beams are actually quite small there. And our beams only go around the perimeter. They don't go across the wall. So I'm going to kind of eliminate a bunch of these other lines here. So we don't need the lines below, like so. And we could actually hide our walls just to remove some lines. But you can see actually as I hid my walls there, my walls did not hide. So let's maybe just fix that quickly. And our walls are assigned to our floor. So that's why they're not hiding. So now I'm just going to remove this line here. And we could create this into a group now. So let's group this and make group. And let's edit our group here. And I'm just going to bring our walls back. And so with this, we're not putting our ceiling here. Our ceiling is actually going to be a little bit higher. We just have our beam here. So I'm going to actually remove this back line. And we're going to extrude this beam up our 7.25 inches, which is our 2x8s. So that's our kind of ring beam going around the perimeter of our porch. The next thing I want to do is the actual roof itself. But what I'm going to do with the roof actually is I'm going to close this group. And I'm actually going to create another group for the roof. And so we've kind of talked a little bit about the confusion between groups and components and now tags. So the one thing that you can do is you can have multiple groups in a tag. So I'm going to put this beam in my entry roof tag. And so that we have some organization that way. So let's grab this. Let's make a new tag. We'll call this roof, and we'll call this entry porch. And I didn't mean to put a J there, but I'll just leave it there. We'll call this entry roof porch. And so now let's start another group. So let's model this extrusion here. And when you're looking at a roof, most roofs have overhangs, and so probably the same with this. We're probably going to have some sort of overhang as well. So let's go back to our drawings here, and it looks like we have a 12-inch overhang on the side here. Let's see if we can look at it on another elevation. It actually doesn't say, but that looks like it's either 12 or more. I'm going to call it 12 because it doesn't say. So let's just call it the same 12 inches. And so let's offset this. And it doesn't want to offset. So let's offset that 12 inches out like that. And it did offset everything. So I'm just going to draw this line straight across here because our roof's probably not going to go past our walls. And we can, let's just see what all this looks like here. Yeah, there we go. So let's just remove that line. And before we go too far, let's create another group just so we can be editing in our group here. And so I'm going to grab all this, and then I'm going to shift select and just unselect our beam so it's in its own group. And then let's right click, let's go to a group, and let's turn back on a bunch of our stuff here. So there's our roof. And so let's now work on the pitch. So let's edit our piece here. And so we have a slope of some sorts. And I think the normal assumption it's probably going to be the same, the 512, but you actually look at the drawings, it's not. So we have a 612 pitch here. Honestly, don't know why they decided to do this. I'd probably just keep it the same, but for all intents and purposes, it's different, so let's make it different. So let's do our 612. And so we're going to go to our side here, and we're going to go over our 12 inches. We'll find that. We'll go up our 6 inches, and like this, and then we'll extend this along our pink line till it gets to some sort of edge. In this case, it gets to the wall, and it did lock there nicely. And with this, when you look at the elevations, this elevation is a little bit misleading. I don't think this elevation is really right, because the roof doesn't really look that way on the side. It needs to have some sort of overhang. It almost looks like this is meant to be a hip roof on this side. So let's maybe just check on the other side and see if it's the same or different. It does look the same, so I don't know. It just doesn't look right, in my opinion. Well, so the front elevation, the roof is sloped properly here, but yeah, when you see these, you actually see these little dash lines here. So it's actually, there is like an overhang, so it is set back from that beam location. And so just things to note and think about, and I'm kind of talking you through my thinking, and I'm not necessarily expecting you to think the same way, but I want to talk you through the decisions that I've made. And I've obviously been doing this a while, so like I see these things almost instantly, right? But we're not expecting you to, but I think the one cool thing about using SketchUp and working kind of in tandem with your drawings is it actually will influence your drawings. You'll understand how things work, because once you model in 3D, you're like, oh, that's not right, or that doesn't look right. So I think it is a good tool, and hopefully that helps all of you. So let's clear that line off there. And actually, one thing I did not do is I did not do a fascia board. So let's do a fascia board. So let's extrude this up 6 inches. And then let's do that slope line again. So let's go over 12. I went over 12 feet. I'm not going to do that. Let's go over 12 inches. And let's go up our 6 inches again. Find that connection. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to bring this line down, and let's clear this. And let's offset this in by our 6 inches. And actually that line's in the wrong spot anyways, so. And so that's kind of our roof area there. So let's bring this in something like that. And we can extrude this in. So this part will be extruded in basically to our beam. And then this part would get extruded all the way over. And we can hit the control button, and that allows us to keep extruding. And so now this gets extruded in like this. And so this is really what our roof looks like. And on this end, it looks like we do have to close in this area. And I do have these intersecting lines, so I'm just going to use them. But again, if you don't, we could extrude that part back. There's a few different ways we could do that. And let's eliminate these lines here, eliminate those lines, and there we go. We have our roof on our front porch. We've got these extra lines here, and so we've got a roof there. I'm not going to model the columns right now, but that ends up giving you kind of the roof there. And then I think the more important thing too is our overhang is beyond the edge of our post, beyond the edge of the actual footprint of our patio. And so, you know, you have some cover. It's not, the rain's not just going to come directly down on. So let's close that. And that's really the end of our roof portion here. So we've got our main roof and we've got our entry roof. I think we actually do need to assign this a tag. So let's call this same as our entry porch roof. And so the cool thing when we now hide our entry porch roof. It's going to hide the beam and the roof itself. And the other cool thing is you can see we have a ceiling that's raised up a little bit inside. So we have some, interest and depth with our project. So that's roofs. I'm going to stop this recording.